but falling in love with him. He was just so personable and so authentic, and I enormously enjoyed our conversations, and I learned a lot, both from what he told me over the phone and from his writings. And in the end, he agreed to write the afterword to the book, which I was very much honored by. So I think that was one of the highlights of writing the book. The other thing that I think I enjoyed was also writing about Chabad. I had experienced Chabad, and I had bumped into them at various times, but I hadn't ever studied them, and I found that an extremely interesting experience. I remember when I first heard a Chabad representative talk in Waterbury, Connecticut, when I was in high school in the late 1970s, and a Chabad representative came down from Hartford, Connecticut, and I remember hearing him speak and thinking, he's wasting his time coming all this way. Jews in Waterbury, Connecticut, specifically, and non-Orthodox Jews throughout the United States are not going to find this approach appealing in the slightest. He's very traditional looking and very traditional sounding, and he's obviously extremely well-meaning, but it's just not going to fly. And boy, was I wrong. So those were two of the highlights for me: is the Jewish Renewal movement and Chabad.
Do you have an agenda, and if so, what is it?
I don't have a conscious agenda. I suppose that the question I'm trying to answer in this book is, how has American Judaism changed over the past 20 years? And the answer is that it's changed enormously and become much more spiritual, much more influenced by those types of approaches to spirituality which are rooted in emotion rather than in history, rather than in a concrete ethnic identity. As many researchers have been writing, there's been a trend away from ethnicity and towards what you might call religiosity, and this is the major point that I try to document in different ways. So I suppose you could say, if there was an agenda, it was to advance this idea and to emphasize how much work we need to do on a practical basis to make sure that our congregations, or however we want to organize our religious activities in the future, which doesn't necessarily have to be through synagogues, are stressing this approach. And also, as people's mentality change in the coming years, that we learn how to adapt quicker to coming trends. I think that there was a tremendous lag between the changing mentality of most Americans and the organized Jewish community's response, and almost a generational lag. And I think that unnecessarily caused a lot of people to just sail off into the bold blue yonder, never to be seen again. And I think we can't afford to be slow on the draw in the future.
Rabbi Norman Lamb, a couple of weeks in the Jerusalem Post, said that we'll soon be seeing Kaddish on conservative and Reform Judaism. Did you hear about this?
I did hear about this, and I had interviewed Rabbi Lamb over the phone for this book, and specifically in Chapter 3, The Rise and Fall of American Jewish Denominationalism. I'd actually been bar mitzvahed by Rabbi Lamb, I was raised in a Reform household, but when I turned 12 and we were planning a bar mitzvah, my parents started taking me regularly to Temple Rav Shalom on the Upper West Side, where we were planning to have the bar mitzvah. But they used an organ, and I just reacted very emotionally negative to that organ, and I said I didn't want to be bar mitzvah there. So I, went right up the street was the Jewish Center, where I had been going periodically as well. So we signed up there as members, or maybe we'd already been joint members, I don't know. But I said I want to have my bar mitzvah there, so my parents said fine. And Rabbi Lamb, as well as Rabbi Leo Young, led the services at my bar mitzvah. So I'd been familiar with Rabbi Lamb from when I was a child. I used to love going to Saturday morning services there to hear Rabbi Lamb's sermons. He, from what I remember as a child, he spoke a lot about Israel and about, the politics of Israel and the Middle East, and I really enjoyed that. So I was familiar with Rabbi Lamb both as a child and more recently. I wasn't really surprised by his comments. I mean, there was a number of articles that said that he had always been trying to balance being a mensch in terms of the way he would address the non-Orthodox versus his private views, and that in this particular context he let his private views express themselves publicly, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. When I first read the comments, I thought he was responding specifically to recent events that the Hebrew Union College in particular has been experiencing, has just realized that they're going to be having a tremendously large deficit of between $5 to $8 million, and they've started a frantic process to try to figure out how to stem the flow of cash and maintain themselves as a viable academic institution. And the Jewish Theological Seminary likewise has been making some less drastic cuts, and apparently may be anticipating a huge deficit even after the cuts. So at first I thought he was specifically responding to these events, and had reached the conclusion that this marked the beginning of the end for the non-Orthodox movements. And this was a question that I was dealing with at that time 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've since reached some tentative conclusions that things may not be as dire as I first thought. But in any case, I thought that was what he was addressing. As I looked through the comments more carefully, it became clear that this was not at all the case, that this was simply a general comment expressing views that he has probably held for 30 or 40 years, and as such is simply his general point of view and doesn't reflect anything, any specific response to recent events. So I think that this is probably how most Orthodox leaders feel about the non-Orthodox. And I don't think there's anything in my book that's going to change Rabbi Lamb's mind. Rabbi Lamb is talked about in the book specifically in the context of efforts to build a joint Beit Din, which would have been very helpful in terms of maintaining Jewish unity. Rabbi Stanley Wagner, an Orthodox rabbi in Denver, had been critical in creating and maintaining such a joint Beit Din in Denver for quite a while, until the patrilineal dissent resolution of 1983 was passed by the Reform movement, and the Orthodox rabbis in Denver came under tremendous pressure to pull out of that joint program. And Rabbi Lamb likewise was involved in a number of negotiations to try to maintain Jewish unity, and he's tried to play a constructive role in that. But as you know, there's